Relatively speaking, there's a lot to talk about in a relatively short amount of time. Again, all relatively speaking. And the topic was, I spoke to Rabbi Gottesman beforehand. He said, to talk about v'ta'mi hamikra, the Messiah, where it comes from, what it's about. And the emphasis is it's a loaded topic. We're all used to hearing v'ta'mi hamikra. If you're not a Balkari, you don't pay too much attention to it. If you are a Balkari, you might pay more attention to it. But there's a very essential shiloh, which is what's the source for the v'ta'mi hamikra? It's not something that there's large sets of halacha that are discussed in regular Shulchan Aruch about all the different ta'amim, about all the different trop. And we know that the different kehilos have slightly different variations of how it sounds. A Sephardic Kriyas HaTorah doesn't sound like an Ashkenazi Kriyas HaTorah, and the emphasis is even amongst Ashkenazim. If you go to the Yekes, it doesn't sound like a Litvish Kriyas HaTorah. And if you go in even between Hungarians and the Polisher, the older Kriyas HaTorah, you'll hear subtle differences. Sephardi, which they call now Nusach Yerushalayim, and then there's the Italians, and there's the Teimanim, and they're all different. The Simonim, except for maybe a little bit by the Teimanim, are pretty much the same Simonim that are utilized, maybe with slightly different names. And if you look in the front or back of a Chumash, depending on the Chumash, it might be a slightly different order. But in the Psukim, it doesn't make a difference what the order was that they put it in the front or the back of the Chumash. It's however it is on the Pasuk. So, to discuss this at a little bit greater length, we'll go through some of the sugis. But before ending, I want to share a Maisa with the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan was a Rav in Nevardik. Actually, my great-grandfather was Yarshind, his shteller in Nevardik. Avodas HaMelech, that was his first Rabbanus, was in Nevardik. But he had a Maisa like this, that there was a maskil who wrote a sefer on Dikduk. And he passed through Nevardik at some point in time, about a year after he published his sefer on Dikduk. He was passing through Nevardik, and he had a few unresolved issues in Dikduk. And he heard that the Aruch HaShulchan, aside from being a Merdik Talmid Chacham, that a can't epis in Dikduk. So he decided to go into the Aruch HaShulchan. He went into the Aruch HaShulchan with his kashas. Didn't look like such a mask when he came in. He put up a Schweizer Kappel, after Afila Kappelich. And he went in and he asked his shaylas to the Aruch HaShulchan. And the Aruch HaShulchan answered him with very detailed answers and explained to him that he had, that certain hanachas that he made were a little bit wrong. And then he asked him, he says, are you this maskil, the Baal Mechaber of the Sefer? And he said, yes. How do you know? So he says, well, your kashas were based on falshi yisaidis. And those falshi yisaidis were in your sefer. And only somebody who had those falshi yisaidis so ingrained already in him could have asked the kashas that you asked. So I figured you must be the mechaber of the sefer. And then he went to explain to him why he missed the boat in these yisaidis that he was baina. And the fellow was nishtaimim. He was shocked. He couldn't understand it. And he turned to a little bit depressed. And he turned to the Aruch HaShulchan and says, I don't understand. My ganze life, my whole life, this is what I learned. Dikduk. I learned Nach, and I learned Tanakh, and I shtel on the Dikduk of the Psukim, and how it's structured, and how the Nakud changes, and the conjugations, and the tenses. This is what I do. And you're a yeshiva man, you're a paisik, you learn Gemara, you learn paiskim. This isn't your Ikra Asik, but you've mastered it so much better than me. So he tells him, I want to tell you a mashal. There's a fellow who came into the town store to buy a new set of china for Shabbos. Enough kids, enough shilos that happened in kashrus that he had to buy already a new set of china. Came in and he bought, a ganze new set. And after he pays for it, he turns to the clerk at the counter and he says, could you please wrap it for me? I'm bringing it back to my Rebbetzin. I want to have a shena matana, nice, should come with a nice packaging. So he packages it up with nice wrapping paper, puts on it a bow, everything, and says, here you go. He walks out. The guy behind him in line comes and says, I want some wrapping paper. So he says, okay. He pulls out. He says, what size? He tells him the measurement. Yes, in Europe it was also metric, so 1.5 meters by, 60 centimeters. And he cuts it up, gives it to him, says, can I have also some ribbon? So he says, yeah, it'll be 5 rubles for the wrapping paper, 2 rubles for the ribbon. He says, what do you mean? The guy before me, not only did you give him the wrapping paper and the ribbon, but you actually wrapped it up for me. You didn't charge him anything. He tells him, buddy, I don't know how to explain this to you. The guy before came in and bought a 3,000 ruble set of china. And then he asked me to wrap it for him. So, gewaldig, I threw it in for him on the house. You came in and all you're asking for is wrapping paper. Shanemel, I'm going to charge you for it. So he says, when you learn Torah, and you learn it, Amanas Lamed, Amanas Lasais, you learn it Lishma, Avim Edaf Tzazayin. So the Yerushalayim throws in the wrapping paper as a matana. It's on the house. Says, you absorb it. He says, when that's all you learn, Shanemel, you have to pay for it. So tonight we're going to talk about something which is a little bit of a wrapping paper, but I think it's a little bit more, amol, you get something wrapped, and it's, the wrapping paper, just, a cheap piece of paper that was wrapped, maybe with some glitter or something like that on it, and it was, wrapped nicely in a little bow, a little flower, and you get it's just to, conceal the present and make it look a little bit more presentable, and no pun intended, and you bring it in to the person, they rip it up, and they toss it in the garbage, and they have their matana there. Amol, somebody brings you a matana and it comes in a golden pushka. It comes in a nice silver, gold box. And it's a shvei erech b'fnei atzmo. So it's sivert epis. It's worth something. So over here it's wrapping paper, but Be'ez Hashem it should be worth epis. So Lamaisa, whoever does have the Mar Mekaymis in front of them, the Mar Mekaymis, if you notice, or in the order, Begadol, in the order of how the various sugis appear in order in Shas. So, Rabbi Belsky used to say over a Maisa that the Chofetz Chaim was dancing with Bechonon on Simchas Torah, and he told him quietly, he says, Sikadai to learn in Masechtas the Shas al Seder, because otherwise you might forget it's a kleiner Masechta Krisisol. And he says that the one Masechta Bechonon hadn't learned was Krisus Taka. And he was, a little bit taken aback. And, after that he learned Shas al Pi Seder. So also when you're trying to repair something in Mesoder, it's Kedai to be Mesader in a way, it's to go through Masechta by Masechta. I think, where do I remember that it came up, and to put it down as, in that order. So we're going to build a sugya here based on these Mar Mekaymis. The Gemara in Brachos, Daf Samach Beis Amud Aleph, right? So it talks about there after somebody relieves themselves and they need to clean themselves off, that they're not allowed to wipe themselves with their right hand. And the Gemara gives different reasons. One of those reasons that's given is because it was used, people use their right hand to show the Baal Kairei, the Ta'amim, to show them the trop on the side of the Torah. Rashi says on the spot that he saw people who came from Eretz Yisrael use this. Now you see people from all over the world who use this, especially if the Baal Kairei didn't particularly prepare. So somebody on the side who gives him simonim, he's mesamin to him, he gives him signs, how to lean. Now it's interesting that would be something that already will create an issue of that the hand becomes like a chefza, a shal mitzvah, a klei kodesh, just by the means that sometimes some people use it to give simonim. And Emma says is in last week's Sedra, in Kisisa, we read about the kiyar, and the kiyar uses a lashon of mitzvah, and the Ramban says on that lashon of mitzvah, he says, well, what kind of mitzvah is the kiyar? It's not one of the mitzvahs. Right? And then you have to get into all the sugyas of mitzvahs and how to count mitzvahs to know why it is or isn't a mitzvah. But he says, Lamaisa was used lashon mitzvah because it's a hechsher mitzvah, and filling the water in the morning is also called a mitzvah because it's a hechsher mitzvah. And mela hechsher mitzvah harein kemitzvah. There's a lot of nafkaminas lahalacha, right? When we wash our hands, a bracha needs to be made over lasiyason. But lamaisa, as long as you made it before you dry the hands, because that's really the opposite. It's shiari mitzvah, but a hechsher mitzvah and shiari mitzvah are a chelik of the mitzvah. Everything that surrounds the mitzvah become a chelik of the mitzvah. So to over here, anything which becomes a chelik of the kriyas HaTorah somehow becomes part of that mitzvah. Fine, interessante ara. But now the lashon of Rashi there is gar interessant. Rashi says like this: Neginois tamim mikra shel Torah neviim uksuvim bein benikur shebesefer bein bahagabas koil when somebody raises their voice, uvetziltzul ni'imus hanegina, the tziltzul, the ringing of the pleasantness of the musicality, the cantorial notes, I guess somebody would say. Shal pashto v'dargo v'shayfer mahapech, so he uses the lashon more like the Svardim. Meilech yodel v'ta'mei nagina risi b'koyrim habam meretz Yisrael. So it's interesting that he says the trop is there to make it geschmack, to make it noim, to make it pleasant. Fine. That's ha'ara now to shelf. Gemara in Yuma. So the Gemara in Yuma, just to recapitulate on Rashi there, right? The Gemara, we see Kallah from the Gemara that is talking about Tami Mikra. We see from Rashi that the Iker Tafkid is to make it sound nice. And we also see that we Zecher had trop, the way we know it, Pachot Yoter, during the Zman of the Talmud, of the Gemara. Gemara in Yuma, Daf Nun Beis. So, just as a slight introduction to this Gemara, you have to understand that there's two larger groups. They're subdivided afterwards. At least, one of the groups is very subdivided afterwards, of types of trop. There's Melachim and Misharsim. Melachim are, basically a Seif Pasuk and an Asnachta, where it's a stop. A Asnachta, I guess you can say, is equivalent of a comma, and the Seif Pasuk is equivalent of a period, so to speak. Not necessarily so. And, there's certain types of Talmud in Ksubim that it gets a little bit more complicated, where there's also a few extra trop, and that's beyond the scope of the shir to discuss. But that's one group of trop. And the other group of trop is what we call Misharsim. And in Misharsim is various subdivisions. Misharsim is basically all the other trop. So now, the Gemara in Yuma and Rashi over there, it's mavur that the chashivos of the Tami Mikra, definitely what we call the Malachim, the Esnachta and the Seif Pasuk, right, is le'inyon pisuk akra, that it's there in order to tell us how to punctuate a pasuk. Right? And that makes it much bigger different than maybe some of the other ta'amim, which we're going to discuss later on, what might be the siba, what might be, what was licht, what the purpose of all the different ta'amim are. Now, if you look at the Marsha, it's also mavur that the Marsha takes it at Nemzan as a davar pashut, that the Tamei HaMikra were around as halacha Moshe Sinai, from Har Sinai until the Sugyas Hashas Batzim, and the whole nidain that's a shaila in the Sugya in Yuma as to where to put the snachta in the pasuk is a nidain because they forgot the Tamei. And we find that by lots of things that Seifei Tevais, the Chayzim, the Nevi'im were re-mechadish. It's half of a fell if you think about it. We take for granted when we think about Yerushalayim Hadairos, so we think that the Frierdick Hadairos, where everything was Pashat Mayardik. So it's true that there's Yerushalayim Hadairos, Chas v'Shalom, Rishayim Kemalachim, right? That's all 100% true. Elamai. Klal Yisrael did go through Shver Tekufas, where the masses of Am Yisrael were at a very low level, to the extent that Roiv Rubai of Am Yisrael didn't know how to read, Zicher didn't know Nikud, and Dikduk, and maybe we don't know that either too much nowadays, on the mass level, even amongst the Bnei Torah, and they certainly didn't know the trop. So, but that's again, we see Kallah that it was around, and we see at the Marsha, Nemzon as a davar pashut, that it was around since Kabbalah Satira. Moving on in the Mar Mekaymis. Gemara in the Darim talks about a very interesting sugya, right? We all learn Torah, and we have Rebbeim that teach us Torah, and our kids have Rebbeim that teach them Torah, and in Yeshiva you have Magid Yeshurim that teach them Torah. And, if somebody's teaching Torah, they have to make a living somehow. So the Gemara dans, is somebody allowed to take money for teaching Torah? So the Gemara says, for children, that's fine. Rav says it's fine to teach children. Why? Because they also need a babysitter. So Agam at the Rebbe, the Aleph Beis Rebbe is teaching the kindergarteners Aleph Beis, and he's teaching them how to read, and that's Torah, and L'ch'ayra, you should be doing that for free. Ma'ani b'chinam, ma'afatim b'chinam, and with the Ishtimash b'saga chalav, Chazal is replete with different places that it tells us you're not supposed to teach Torah for schar, you're not supposed to use Torah in order to gain personal benefits. But that's fine because you're also babysitting. So, the math teacher or an English teacher or somebody else would also get up as a salary. And part of that's not just because they're teaching them math or whatever. It's because tachlis, they're babysitting them. And so too, the Rebbe can take a salary for babysitting. But what about teaching adults? So the Gemara is talking specifically about mikra. It could be that much more can be extrapolated from this. So again, the Paiskim do relate to this. Definitely the Achrayim. The Rambam relates to it more, and specifically when it comes to mikra. But the Achrayim definitely relate to it in other areas. And the and Rabbi Yochanan, who we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, because as the Ran says on the spot, the Ran is also on the Mar Mekayma sheets, that when you have a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan, we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says that you can teach take schar for teaching a gadol, for teaching an adult psukim, because a pisuk tamei kra, because you're teaching him trop, and trop is not de oiraisa. Now, why did I say de oiraisa? I did not say mi de oiraisa. So there are from the later achronim that want to extrapolate that anything which is a derabanan would have the same din. So when you're teaching halachas that are only derabanan, you can also take schar. And the Paisei Basra, and already from the time of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, they don't adopt such an opinion, and they're actually against such a mahalach. I think it's possibly because of this nakuda of da'iraisa mida'iraisa, which we will get back to. Again, this is an important ha'ara to shelf. Additionally, shteit nisht, it doesn't say that they're mid'rabanan. It just says lav de'iraisa. Okay.
I think maybe Rabbi Kreski, you don't have to follow the Mekaymis, exactly inside. Give us a little bit of the flavor here, because I want Eileen to be able to walk out with
Okay.
With the Geshmakite.
Yes, and I want to get to a certain unique point here. After you see there's one Mara Makom, which is a Mardik important Mara Makom towards the end, which is a Sefer Hasidim. The Sefer Hasidim tells us like this. He says that it's Vadai that it's a Vadai Halacha Moshe Messinai. And then he says at the end, the makar for it, that it was that the Ta'amei HaMikra were around by Kabbalah Satayra, is from the fact that it says Vashem Yanenu Bakoil by Kabbalah Satayra. So wait a second. What's Vashem Yanenu Bakoil? What is Hashem Yanenu Bakoil? How do we know Ta'amei HaMikra from the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Eine Bakoil, HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers Bakoil? Back to that first Rashi. Rashi in Brachos told us that it's the koil, it's the ne'imos, it's the tziltzul of the mikra. So the pshat is like this: when somebody talks, it's dibur. That's dibur. Somebody's talking, it's speech. You hear them. When we use a lashon of koil, it's a little bit more unique. Where else do we have that? The Gemara learns out the din of Kol Isha Erva from a pasuk in Shir Hashirim. Ashmini es koilech arivu marich nave. A koil entails more than just the words, more than just what somebody's saying. It's intonation. A baskol is something which has a certain character to it. It's an embodiment of Kivyochol, the Rebbeinu Shalom talking to us, and it has a certain embodiment. And by Har Sinai, it also had some sort of embodiment. Now, I don't know if it was punk a niggin or not, but there's a Zohar HaKadosh which tells us in Parshas Pinchas and Parshas V'Yakel, and it tells us that the Kriyas HaTorah that we learn is supposed to be me'ein ma'im and arsin, and there are a lot of halachas that are gebayt from this. In Shulchan Aruch, it's gepaskint that we need to have a gabbai. Sirsur that it uses there, mitavech, you need to have a gabbai, because it has to be that he's mekilu being mekabel Torah and pia gvura. And there might be a reason to have three people based on a few different reasons because of this zayar. There are a lot of halachas that are based directly off of this zayar. Yeah. So there's a lot that we learn from it resembling Kabbalah Satira at Maimed Har Sinai. Memelo, Kommt Achais, that the Pshat is like this. Now, in Yerushalayim, at the end of Hilchas Kriyas HaTorah, Reish Mem Aleph, it goes through the halachas. Somebody is Taya by Kriyas HaTorah. The Torah brings the manhig that says that you don't correct Bichlal because you're going to be Mevayish somebody. Now, all the Naisa Kalim, Kallah, the Beis Yosef, and the Bach start off an art saying, how could that be? It's Ma'akev, it's going to stare the whole Kriya, and that's not something which we can do, for all sorts of different reasons, and it brings rayas that it's a problem. Amaisa, they come up either with a yishuv that the halacha is not like the manning and that they don't understand the manning, or they come up and they say there's a yishuv, they bring a rivon that says mefurish, not like the manning, and they say that it's really either the manning means mistakes that don't make a difference, don't make a nafkamina to the havana. That those types of mistakes you don't have to correct. When it comes to Tami HaMikra, almost nobody says that you have to correct any Tami HaMikra except for Pisuk HaKra, and the Malachim, Esnachta, Seif Pasuk, because that can make a tremendous nafkamina out what the Pasuk means. The Gross says that specifically, others might be mashma that. The Mela, Kum Tachais, now the raya for the Sefer, for the Manhig, is that the last halacha is that, almost the last halacha, is I think Sif Zayin, is that if there is a community that doesn't have somebody who knows how to lane, so that somebody who doesn't know how to lane should still lane. So it's not to be mevatel the kriyas HaTorah. I say, you see, it's not really ma'akiv. These things maybe are just dinam lechatchil. But if it's a din lechatchil, you see that everybody else held that you are misakin. So it's still not like the manning. But we see that there's an order of priorities in mistakes. Why is that? Because again, it's mi'ain maimen har Sinai. The pisuk tame mikro that are there for the tziltzul, that are noim, to give a pleasantness to how we read the psukim, are there in order to make the koil an under a start kol, not just a dibur, not just that somebody's saying the words of the psukim, but lemaisa lav de oiraiso. That's not the etzem chumash. It's not necessary there to know. You want to say over a pasuk, you have a drasha to say from a pasuk. So agam, you have drashas that the Gra brings the sach drashas from Ta'amei HaMikra, and I'm going to talk about a few places where there's a machloikis in Ta'amei HaMikra. The Mincha Shai brings a number of these places. One of the most famous ones is Katointi. When Yankov Avinu says Katointi mikol hachasadim, so everybody does it as lo gerish, right? And the whole tzibur says it together with them, right? Katointi. Right, and Ka'ela is the other place where he brings the same machloikis. But now he says the other one, the other tzad is that it's a reviyah, that it's katayinti. So now, so I had a Rebbe, I learned 1 year in Sharator in Queens, so Reb Shalom Spitz, said to him, it's a davar pasha that should be a reviyah. He says, why? Because nobody's bragging that katainti. So they're the same darga in terms of misharsim, again, without getting into all the different dargas of misharsim. However, one of them is more of is turning something more grand, and the other one is kind of making it a little bit more still. So Ravia, you go down, it's a little bit more still. So he says when somebody says katainti, they probably says katainti. And Rabbi Belsky had a lot of things where he would, when he would kind of sing the pasuk and say, you see, that's the pshat in the pasuk. That you see, it's made more glorious, or it's made more. Like, right. So the idea is that while there's something that's munach in it, it's not the essence of the pasuk. Now the Zohar Kodesh is interesting. The Zohar Kodesh by Tam Elyon and Tam Tachton. Right. So Tam Elyon, to explain to those who don't understand the difference, everyone knows there's Tam Elyon for the luchais and there's Tam Tachton in both parashiyos of the luchais, which is an interesting akuda klape daning with the achroidim and the paiskim, how you lane each time and when you lane one way. Because if you only lane Tam Elyon for, like the Magen Avram says, and like many are, it's really the Chizkuni already says that it's only on Shavuos when we read the Maimen Har Sinai. If that would be the case, then we shouldn't have, for the second time the Luchas appears in Sefer Dvarim, so we shouldn't have a Tam Elyon because that never gets laned on Shavuos. So you should only have a Tam Elyon for the Luchas in Parshas Yisroi. Elamai, the mashmais from the Zohar is that it's read both times. Anytime you read it Betzibur, it's read with Tam Elyon. The Bir Halacha brings three different minhagim about it, and Nar Pashte, there's different minhagim, and I'm not storing up with any minhag, and each one is mevusas in halacha. But the Zohar Kodesh says the reason why you need two sets of trop for the luchais is like this: is that one set of trop, with one set of trop, we'd assume when it says things like lo sirtzach in the luchais, it means never. That there's never a heter to be reitzech, even when Bezdin is chayiv to kill somebody. There's a chayiv misa, arba misa is Bezdin. Bezdin wouldn't be able to do it because it says in the luchais abris loy sirtzach. So from the fact that there's two ta'amim on loy sirtzach, either a seif pasuk, right, or a mesharis. So from the fact that there's two sets of ta'amim on it, we see that it's not always shaveh. Not every ritzicha has the same din ritzicha. It's a Zohar Kodesh. And he goes through a number of the dibros, the Zohar goes through a number of dibros to show us the difference between the pisuk tam mikra and tam elyon and in tam tachtoin. So there could be nafkaminas that are learned from it, but it's still not the nafkaminas. You look in Shas, we don't learn any chiyuv of misas bezdin from these shinuyim. It's just something that it somehow gives the koyach to it. So lav da'iraisa doesn't mean that it's not mi da'iraisa, not that it's not alocha Moshe Misinai. Avada it's alocha Moshe Misinai, or avada it's mi Moshe Misinai. But the question is that a din that it needs to be done like that? Is that part of the Torah, that it's part and parcel and inseparable from Kriyas Torah, from reading the Psukim, or no? Is it be'etzem something which is a zaytig din? It's something which is there to accompany it because the Torah was given in koilos, and it wasn't given just stam as a dibur. Obviously, we can't mimic the Rebbeinu Shalayim's dibur, but to make it that it's not stam a dibur, so that's what we utilize. The way it was given, there are certain notes which all have very important droshes versus gebayt from them because of that. Memelo, come to Reis, everything is miyoshev. Tzalacha Meishim Sinai. It's not on Seif Pasuk, might very well be ma'akev, like the Gra holds, because that changes the meaning of the Pasuk. So definitely lechatchilo, that should be ma'akev. Maybe but the Eved would be mekel, like we see if you don't have anybody who knows how to learn, so it's not to be mevatel it legamre. But it's still something that we always had around. It's not something new. It wasn't fabricated at any point in time. And maybe that's why everybody has pretty much a very similar Messiahs and uses the same signs and the same, you may call it different names, but they're all there. Now, it's interesting. There's two things that if you look around amongst all the different Eidos, right, you look at the Nosach HaTfilah, so even with the institution, you had Nosach Eidut HaMizrach and Nosach Ashkenaz, and then Svard, which the original Svard, you look at the earlier Nosach Svard Sidurim, where Ba'atzim Gebayt from, trying to put in a lot of the things that Nosach Eidut HaMizrach was Nesyachis to, Al Pi Kabbalah, Al Pi Teres Arizal, we try to put it back into the more classic Nosach Ashkenaz, so to speak. But Bigadol, by and large, you walk into any shul, you can daven with somebody who davens almost any other Nosach. One time I was in Italy, in Rome, and I was in the great synagogue there. It was the only place that I really had a hard time following their davening, and that was because of their havara. And that's the nakuda that I want to get to. There's two areas that there's change. You can follow, everybody reads the same Torah, right? Okay, the Teimanim have certain P'tzua Dako, they spell it differently, right? There's certain minor changes, but we all have the same Sefer Torah. We all read the same parashiyos, the same psukim. I laughed that once upon a time there were two different minhagim, minhag Eretz Yisrael and minhag Bavel, right? Whether it was 1 year or 3 years for the Kriyas Torah, but we all read the same parashiyos. We all read the same psukim. We all have the same Sefer Torah. Again, possible minor differences in ksav, which also Al Pi Rav, my uncle, Rabbi Yaakov Shlang Zechariah Levracha, so he told me that. I don't remember if the nusach in the story was that he didn't take the aliyah in a chassidus shul that had a valish ksav, or if it was that he took the aliyah and they wanted to know if he did the right thing. And Rabbi Shimon Zalman told him, all Sifrei Torah and all Mesoret and ksav are ksherim. So, and Chas v'shalom to Mahar, and he says you should never come to shul not taking a liyah from a Sefer Torah because you're chayshish that the ksav is not a kosher ksav. Again, not if there's a mistake that was found in the Sefer Torah, but if it's a shiloh and it's in the tzuras ksav that this is a Messiah, says, we're not chayshish that any of these Messiahs are not right. But the two areas that we have differences are in the higui, in the havara, right? A Litvak doesn't sound like a Hasidische, and Shanemel, a Svarische, doesn't sound like an Ashkenazische, and a real American fellow might sound a little bit different than everybody else, and a real Israelis, different types of Israelis have their own thing, and the Ta'amei HaMikra. That we see differences, again, whether you go up or down, whether a Reviyah, the Sfaradim also go down by a Reviyah, and the Ashkenazim also go down by a Reviyah, right? And as Lagerish, they both go up. But the exact pronunciation and enunciation and accentation, both of the cantorial notes and of the Nikud, very much depend on how we socially, how people socially changed in the societies that they are. The Svarishalaning sounds more similar to the Arabic Gulf type of style, and the Yekis sounds very much like a German, more like a German march or something like that. And there are those differences based on basically because it's the same time, but it goes through a certain change process through the things through the kehillas that we live in and the ashpais that we have around us. Now, it's interesting. Back to the point of Kabbalas Torah being Me'ein Maimon Har Sinai. So the Chuvas Rashba explains the reason why we do Shtayim Mikra Be'echad Targum is because, and the reason why it's Dafka Targum is because the Torah was Ibr Gegeben, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah in Lashon Aramis. He says the Imais came from Aram Naraim. They spoke Aramis, and Memelo, that was the spoken language. It says Shaloi Shinu was the Shainim. When the Medrash tells us that, they spoke Aramis in Mitzrayim. Now, what was the reason for that? It's similar to the reason why Ashkenazim speak Yiddish. The Lashon HaKodesh is a Lashon that's Malei Kedusha, and it's a Lashon that we're very makbid on the Shayroshim, and we make Sharm, and we see all the droshes in Chazal, ad kidei kach that even the Ta'amei HaMikra make a difference in droshes for the Darshei Rishumais v'chulei. So it's because that's something which is inherent only in a Lashon HaKodesh, which is the Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon Meduberes, when you speak about regular things, you're not going to use Lashon HaKodesh. So you use Lashon Aramis. Melo, that was the reason why they had a Metorgamon, and why the Teimanim Arayim have a Metorgamon, because that's Me'ein Kabbalas HaTorah by Har Sinai. It wasn't merely a translation. The idea was that was Me'ein Kabbalas HaTorah by Har Sinai. So, Memelo, when it comes back to how we talk, it's supposed to be a little bit different than Lashon HaKodesh. But it's going to have an influence on our Lashon HaKodesh. Sai in the tzlil, how it sounds when we lane, how the exact trop sounds, and sai, how we pronounce the exact nikud. So these are important yisodos when it comes to Kriyas Torah. I hope when they lane, they'll start paying attention to it. But just as Oifen Klali, it's gepaskent by the Chaya Adam and by the Chasam Sofer, Ta'amei HaMikra, Ar Lacha Moshe Messinai. Memelo, this would seem to be the whole Yishuv, that it's there be'etzem to mimic that Maimir of Har Sinai, and at the same time, it's there to give that Ne'imos HaMikra. Again, aside from the Snachta and Seif Pasuk, that's why there's two sets. And if you look at the Mar Makarim, you'll see that there's certain references to Pisuk, Ta'amei, Mikra, which L'chayr would seem to be directly how you punctuate the Pasuk. And then there's the aspect that Rashi brings, and some of the Acharayim bring, and the Zohar Kodesh, that it's there to give a Gevisa Ne'imos to the Psukim.